So let me start this way by saying that Joyce, if we asked you this question, you could take a few days, couldn't you, to answer?
I know quite a bit about my ancestors, but
yeah, you know a
there's
lot.
probably a lot I don't know.
Yeah. So there's still some things you wish you knew.
You know, all the time I'm thinking, why didn't I ask my mom and dad that when they were alive?
Oh man.
You know?
Aren't there so many little things,
Yeah.
so many places where we think, what was it like to, yeah. In fact, I came up with a few of those myself. I wish that I'd been able to ask Dad what it was like to live with Parkinson's for the last 27 years of your life. And I think seeing Dad and watching him try to deal with it was maybe the answer, the best answer he could give. But what was it like for Mom? What was it like for Paul? What was it like for others who tried to help Dad? Or Percy, J. Percy Goddard. Have you heard of him, Brent?
No.
Yeah. Percy Goddard was, he was a bishop or stake president for about 30 years and was a leader in the community and was a cheerful, pleasant, wonderful human being. And I've wondered, Grandma died fairly young. I think she was 60 when Grandma died. So what was it like for Grandpa to spend a decade and a half of his life by himself? What was that like, Grandpa? And I used to go home teaching with J. Percy Goddard. The state wisely removed his driver's license at some point. I think it was when he started going around the Ruth's Corner at 60 miles an hour. I think the family said, no, this is a problem. And so they removed his driver's license. And so I would take Grandpa home teaching. And I remember us driving up the canyon to the Ram's Ears. And
Yeah, but see, I mean, it sounds like Ram's Ears.
Ram's Ears. Maybe that's where it comes from. A good German family with the last name of Ram's Ear.
Yeah.
And I used to think, boy, what a pain to be so old. And why didn't I ask Grandpa questions? Why is it that when we went home teaching, he would almost every single month tell the same story? And I would think, Grandpa, come on. But he'd tell that same story over and over again. And now, you know what I would pay if I could remember that story? That story that I thought was so tedious from his mission in Germany. He served from 1899 to 1901 in Germany. And I think, why can't I remember a bit of that now? Not a thing, except I remember it was about his mission in Germany, which I think he thought would be of interest to the Ramsier family since they were from Germany. So why didn't I ask Grandpa what life was like for him? I guess when we're young, we sometimes don't think that the older generation is very interesting. We sometimes don't ask them questions and inquire about what it's like to be them. And so we can live with them for a long time, but never dig into their life stories. It's great, Brian, that you have family members who are asking you questions. I think that's marvelous. Here's one that what I would pay. I have dug and I can't find. I wish that Bishop Price, William Price, who was sent by the Quorum of 12 to be the bishop in Goshen, Utah. Something that's not the way it's usually done, but it was in pioneer times. They thought they needed some leadership there, so they called William Price, who lived in Salt Lake, and sent him to Goshen. And he was bishop for decades. Even when he went off and served a mission for several years, they still considered him the bishop of Goshen, Utah. But Ben, as he traveled the state of Utah, my great-grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, Ben was going around the state selling sewing machines, which may seem odd, but you realize that back then, in the pioneer era, people had to make virtually all their clothes, all their blankets, everything. And so Ben shows up in Goshen, Utah, and naturally when you go to a new community, you go to the bishop and you say, Bishop Price, who are the people in your ward who might need a sewing machine? And I just imagine Bishop Price saying, Ben, it's good to meet you. Tell me about your conversion. And Ben said, well, I'm not actually a Latter-day Saint. And he said, well, what have you been learning? And Ben ticked off the books he had read, because everywhere he went, the Latter-day Saints gave him another book. Isn't that kind of our way? If you could just read this book, I think it would fix everything. So he listed in his missionary journal the books that he'd been given and had read. And he'd made a serious study of it. But he was trained as a Methodist minister. And people had been working on him, especially his wife's family. They had been working on him, but he had not joined the church. One conversation was so dramatic that he joined the church on the spot. He told Bishop Price, let's go get me baptized. And they went out to the canal, a pond, and got Ben baptized. What was said in that conversation, Brian? Wouldn't you love to know? Wouldn't you love to know what he said that transformed him from a doubter or a questioner to an embracer, embracing the gospel of Jesus Christ, right?
Yeah, I would really love to hear what that was. I was just thinking last night about the scripture that, come follow me and I will make you fishers of men.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm quoting that exactly right, but close to that. I thought, what is it that the Savior taught, or how is it taught that he made them fishers of men? Like that's a great promise.
That is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it? And so Ben has left a 1,054-page journal of his mission, which I've read and typed, but he never told the story of what happened in that conversation with Bishop Price that caused him to be baptized. And of course, when he got home and told his wife, well, I got baptized, I think she probably thought, well, hold it. What happened? I mean, I thought we were anti or not. I don't know that they were anti, but they had resisted the pleadings of her family that had led the way over to Utah. They had resisted those pleadings for...
And she was still not a member?
She was not a member. So...
Was that Martha?
That's right. Martha Alice Alley. Good job. You get the Family History Award. That's great, Abby.
And just if you go, isn't it interesting? It looks like he has a cross on his.
Yeah. This picture, if I understand it, if I remember right, I think this is taken in England. So it is in fact probably a cross representative of his Methodist convictions. So, wouldn't you love if we had a summary of what it was that was discussed? What was it that Bishop Price said that just, wow, it clicked? And then the avalanche of, oh, it all fits. I'd love to. I can't wait to interview Ben. He's got some stories to tell us. Or, those are some of the questions. I wonder, anybody have any idea who this guy is, this handsome fellow?
Brant.
Brent Lee Goddard and their cousins, and there's Beth and Catherine and David and Alan, Stephen and Wally. I don't know what happened to Wally. And anyway, so we've got a bunch of us gathered at our house in Immigration Canyon with J. Percy Goddard. And there's so many questions that I wish I'd been wise enough to ask. And I suspect that our children may or may not be a lot wiser than we were, but I think we can send forward the messages that they need to know, and when they're ready, they will be there for them. So we don't know all the stories. There's so many we wish we knew, but when we tell the stories that we do know, the stories that were important, it binds hearts. If you remember in Malachi, it talks about turning the hearts of the children to their fathers. And Joseph said of that passage, he said, it would have been more correctly translated as bind the hearts to their fathers. And so I think about binding the hearts. What are the stories we could tell that would Bind Hearts. Hey, Eliza. Let's carry out the hugging ritual.
Hi.
Good to see you, dear. So, what are the stories we can leave behind that will bind the hearts of our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, people still yet unborn, to us and to the truths that we have embraced? And that's really what I want to talk about, is with three general ideas. The first one being, use stories to connect your children to their ancestors. Use stories to build those connections. Use stories, even stories that won't be read for decades to come. Use the stories to bind their hearts. I think Andy and Natalie remember the time when we were headed to St. George, Utah. It's a long trip, isn't it, Andy?
Yep.
A long trip to St. George. We were headed there, and it was kind of boring. And Max was just a little guy, younger than he's pictured here. He was just a little guy, and he was in his car seat, and he got really, really, really bored from that long drive. And he turned to me, sitting next to him, and he said, "Papa, tell me a story about when you were little and you were bad." I thought that was a great prompt, and I had ready answers for him. I told him about when I burned down southern Utah, and his respect for me just skyrocketed. I moved from, an obscure figure in the family tree to a hero. And then when I finished the story, he said, "Papa, tell me another story about when you were little and you were bad." So I told him another story. I told him about teasing my siblings, and that really got his respect also. And so we continued that way for maybe, 100 miles with me, telling him stories. And Natalie's probably wishing I hadn't told him those stories of childhood mischief. But I don't know that Max has been exceedingly mischievous. So in any case, I after a while, I was having a hard time thinking of more stories. I had some good ones about teasing Beth and about battling with Alan. And then, so he turned to Nancy and he said, "Nana, tell me a story about when you were little and you were bad." And we all just broke into laughter. Because Nancy's pool of childhood mischief is extremely shallow. And most of those are just stories that family members have invented, Nancy. Like there's a story about her tying something to a cat's tail, starting on fire, and then the cat runs through the field and starts things. You remember that? Yeah, I think
it's like they said I set a dog's hair on fire and drug it through the, I don't know. I don't remember.
You just have to invent stories to come up with bad stuff about Nancy. And of course the family is quite glad to do that. We like to think that Nancy's got a hidden persona that is yet to be discovered. But anyway, that helped me realize that experience with Max. There's a great power in leaving stories. Just a really incredible power. And so stories capture our interest. They help us relate to others. They build a connection, don't they? A bridge. So we say, "Oh, you were a human too once before you got old." And they're memorable. And there's the bottom line. They bind hearts. So, for instance, Nancy, who's that?
My grandpa.
Your grandpa, Leslie Price Thacker. And boy, Les has such a stories. Les's mother died when he was just a child, and his dad, probably really lost and miserable, decided to support the family. "I'm going to go try to find gold." And so he went up in the mountains and was hardly ever seen by the family. How many kids were there, Nancy?
6.
6? So 6 kids really fending for themselves and essentially, for practical purposes, orphaned. And Les and his brother moved to Wyoming to get jobs, and then ultimately traveled down to Vernal, Utah. And I remember Grandpa saying of Vernal, he said, "Anything bad you could say about Vernal would just have to be true," because it had a pretty harsh climate and plenty of challenges in that place in northeastern Utah. So Les, however, was very, very enterprising. He found ways. He raised sheep. He made and drove a bus in a time when bus drivers had to provide their own bus. And so he went and got a chassis back in Detroit, and then he built the benches and everything inside of it for a bus. And so he could get the contract from the school district for driving the bus from the kids from Mazer to get them to school. And very, very enterprising guy, and he had to be to survive. So he and his brother Lamar, often called Junior, the two of them would just find all these ways to provide for their families. Grandpa got almost no education given his life story, with his mom dying and his dad going off. But boy, he was so tuned to opportunity, so capable. So Grandpa spent his whole life doing things, being a contractor and building things and on and on. Later in life, long after, well, I don't know if he ever really retired, because even as he got older, he worked in when the city had this program for insulating widows' houses. He said, well, I'll go be the installer. And he didn't, I don't know if he got paid anything at all for it. It may have been largely volunteer work, or the pay was so small it didn't matter. But he was glad to do it because he liked to help people. But the story that we captured in a one-pager is this story. So Grandpa looked around, and this was an era when trash cans didn't have wheels. Trash cans were these tin things that 40-gallon, 50-gallon canisters, and you'd fill them with trash, and then on trash day you'd drag them out to the curb. Les recognized that for the widow ladies in the neighborhood, this is pretty tough. Those could be very heavy, and some of them were pretty small and quite frail. So he would go to the widow ladies and he'd say, I wonder if it would help you if I made a cart for your trash cans. And the nice thing about the carts was you could take them out to the curb, and then you could drag them back into your garage or backyard and leave them on the cart. You never had to take them off. You just leave them on the cart. So I think every time the widow ladies would say, oh, Les, that would be such a help. It's such a challenge to drag those heavy canisters out to the street. And he said, well, let's measure you up. So I'd have them stand there with their hands extended so I could see just exactly how high to make that handle. I mean, these were custom carts. And then he'd ask them the really important question, which is, how trashy a woman are you? Are you a 1-can, a 2-can, or a 3-can woman on the typical week? So he'd build the cart, he'd go out to the dump, and you can see a picture there of his shop. There's his shop behind his house. An amazing shop with all kinds of stuff. He could weld, he had all kinds of woodworking tools. So he'd go out in the shop and he'd make a custom cart for each widow lady. And of course, he would get a lot of his supplies from the dump. He'd go out and get the broken down lawnmowers and pull the wheels off of them, and he'd get sheet metal and whatever he could find, because all that would be so useful. So he would find all those supplies, and then he'd make carts for the widows in the neighborhood. Now the part, I don't know whether Andy remembers this or not, but I remember when you were little and your sisters were little, and we'd drive down 2nd North in Vernal, Utah, taking to school or somewhere on trash day. Here was the street lined with Les's carts. We say, you know who made those? You know why he made them? And I remember the kids commenting, boy, Grandpa made a lot of carts, didn't he? So there's just a little story about Grandpa that helps you to say, wow, I love that guy. It helps us bind our hearts to him because of that episode or saga about what he did when he saw a challenge and used his resources to help people. So we love Les Thacker, don't we, Nancy?
Yeah.
And Grandpa, he loved telling stories and he loved singing songs, and from the time he was about 4, he was singing in community and ward gatherings. Just this little tiny, he was called Whitey because his hair was white, and he would sing songs, and even when he was in his 80s and up until he died, we would go over there on Sunday afternoons and ask him questions, and the kids would play, and I think Emily, Andy, and Sarah also heard some of those stories and heard his songs, or recorded a lot of his songs. And wow. See, our goal is to bind the hearts of our children to their ancestors. We want also our grandchildren to say, man, I love that guy. I want to be like Leslie Price Thacker. I want to be that kind of person. So notice it's just a little tiny part of his life. And it doesn't tell you where he was born and how long he lived, but it tells you what his life was really about. Sometimes we assume you can't really tell a story without all those demographics about when they were born and what the name of the town was and what the population was. And I say, that's not what binds hearts. It's okay to know, but what matters is what was in their heart, and that's what binds our hearts. I'll bet you know this story too, Brent, don't you? About Harold and the street sweeper, about how one particular day, my maternal grandfather, Harold E. Wallace, after whom I'm named, he was driving in downtown Salt Lake with 2 of his 6 daughters. And as they were going downtown, one of the girls very unwisely said to her sister, as they passed a street sweeper, which incidentally was done then by manually. Street sweeping wasn't done with a machine, but literally by hand. And so one of the girls commented to her sister, she said, I'm sure glad our dad is the county attorney and not a street sweeper. Now, if you know Harold E. Wallace and his heart, you know that was exactly the wrong thing to say. And he hit the brakes and pulled the car over to the side and parked it, unloaded the 2 girls, and went back and interviewed the street sweeper. And said, tell me about what you do. Is it hard work? Does it make you tired? Why do you do it? You know what he said? Because I love my family. I love my wife and my kids, and I want to take care of them. And so I do this hard work because I love them. So they have this exchange where the girls get to witness this man and his story. And they can see the love he has for his family and the sacrifices he's willing to make. So they have this exchange with the street sweeper, and then Grandpa, a man of immense compassion, a man who, though an attorney, dedicated his life as much as anything to bringing employment opportunities to poor people during the Depression in the Salt Lake Valley. That was one of his initiatives, and I've found a dozen articles in the newspaper telling about his efforts to try to bring jobs to Salt Lake City so that people could provide for their families. So he takes the girls and they're loading in the car, and he says, it's not the kind of work you do, it's the people you love that define you. The more you love, the bigger and better your life. That was Grandpa's motto. What a great motto to say. It's not about the work you do. It's not about your civic prominence. It's about the people you love. And the more you love, the bigger your life. I just love Harold E. Wallace and his great commitment to serving and loving people. Now notice the action of that story all takes place in a pretty small little domain. it's just limited to a visit with a street sweeper in Salt Lake Valley. But it speaks volumes about who Harold was, doesn't it? It tells you who Harold E. Wallace was and why, and we wouldn't even know that story if, I think Beth was interviewing Mom and Aunt Mary, and they told the story, and that's how we have that story. But it needs to be told, doesn't it? It needs to be told and retold that the measure of our lives ultimately will be the people we loved and served. So, you know this story well, I think, Brent, about the time when our dad, B. Orson Goddard, bought 22,000 pounds of wheat. I don't know, you probably got a lot of wheat, Andy. Can you beat that?
Nope.
22,000 pounds. Now, it's worth noting that Grandma had a dry farm, so he bought her whole crop one year. 11 tons, 22,000 pounds of wheat. I think she didn't quite know what to do with it, and Dad said, I'll buy it. So he bought it at market value, bought these 22,000 pounds of wheat, which the way I calculated, that'd make about 22,000 loaves of wheat bread. Now, Mom didn't go to making wheat bread that day and not stop until she had 22,000 loaves, but Dad stored all that wheat. And we lived in a time up Immigration Canyon where a lot of people had a very strong survivalist mentality, and a lot of people were storing guns and ammo, and that has its place. But I love what Dad did. Dad went to the Genealogical Society. The Genealogical Society would take these cans of film, and then they would take pictures of documents, etc. And then they throw away the cans and put the developed film in a cardboard box so they could label and stack on shelves. And so the Genealogical Society had thousands, literally thousands of these tin cans that would hold a roll of 35 millimeter film. So Dad went to the Genealogical Society and said, if the time comes that people are hungry and need wheat, we need a way to share it. I love that. I love that. Now, there's probably a place for appropriate armaments and weapons of defense, but I love that Dad's offense was, let's find ways to share what we have. Let's have 22,000. Now, he also had those great big barrels that were filled with 50 and 100 pound sacks of brown sugar or molasses, or he had all these, and then the inner sanctum of the storage area was with all these canned goods, most of which I think never got eaten, but they were prepared, and I love Dad's attitude that well, there's something to be said for protecting. What I want to do is be ready to share what we have. I love that attitude. I love my dad. In part because I know his heart through the stories of his choices. And I hope that Max and Liza and Abby love their let's see, is he your he is your great-grandfather, right? Since I'm your grandfather. Incidentally, just as a side note, Paul recently reobtained the great big wheat grinder we had in our basement. When I was a kid, I thought it was this tall. Turns out that it's about this tall, but it stands on the floor. It has an enormous, enormous tub, and you could dump 50 pounds of wheat in the top, and it has this high power motor and grinder, and it fills that with flour. And so the whole neighborhood, like Uncle Harold might send down one of his kids and say, we'd like to get some flour, and they'd come and scoop up something, fill it with flour, or one of Uncle Roy's kids would come down. And so we had the wheat and we had the grinder, Paul has just reobtained the grinder, which incidentally, Max has a bad switch, which makes a guy want to get out his screwdriver, doesn't it? So he has to just plug it and unplug it to make it operate. I love this story, and I think it tells us a lot about Benjamin Orson Goddard. Oops, I went too far. So we have started creating one-page stories, and some of you know all about these. Some of you have seen our one-page stories. Abby and Liza and Max, I think you've seen lots of one-page stories, but we started writing stories that actually we'll talk more about the details in a minute, but our guiding principle was tell a vital incident that shows you the values of the person and do it in one page or less, because that's just about the size of a story that typical interest can sustain. It's an ideal length, we think. So one-page stories. Nancy and I realized more recently, in just the last couple years, that we better start telling our story too. We've been thinking just get the ancestor stories, but we've started telling our stories. There's one about my battle with cancer, because we learned a lot in that battle, didn't we, Nancy? And what we learned, we'd like to share with our grandchildren. There's when Andy decided he wanted a western town for a bedroom, and so we made that for him. And there's when I proudly burned down southern Utah. Not everybody can say that, but me and Alan and Lyle Hellquist, we did the job. Well, so here's what we would say are the essential elements of a one-page story. It clearly identifies the ancestor. There's a focus point. This is about so-and-so. It's a short and engaging episode. Something that happened that tells you a lot about their character. It includes struggle or conflict, and in that process shows their values. I mean, in every one of those, I think you can see the values of the person are demonstrated. It includes a photo of the ancestor, and that's really important to us, because in future generations, people may not realize what B. Orson Goddard looks like. Brent and I will always remember. We lived with Dad and loved Dad. We will always remember Dad. But Abby might not, unless we provide a picture. So there's a picture of Dad, or there's Dale Thacker or Ben. So it includes a photo. We can use stock photos to fill in the gaps. So for instance, we didn't have a picture of the street sweeper that Grandpa talked to that day, but we can find a stock picture of a street sweeper so that it evokes an image that would otherwise be absent in the future generations. You know, like Eliza's grandkids may have no idea what a street sweeper is. They may conjure up this image of a machine that goes down the street acting like a vacuum cleaner. So we use stock photos. We minimize the demographics. We don't think it's where it happened as much as what happened inside that matters. And it makes a connection at the very bottom of every one of them. We talk about how that person connects to someone the reader will probably know. Like we connect that, for instance, Dale Francis Thacker is the father of Nancy Sue Thacker Goddard. And you know who that is, don't you? You've met her? And love her? And so more recently we've expanded on that. We have wanted to make sure that it lists the other children of Dale Francis Thacker also, so that if other family members read it, it also list Aisel and Sue and Alan and Lori, so that if their grandkids read it, they can make that connection to Dale Thacker. And they say, oh, that's how I am connected to Dale Francis Thacker. Any questions about those elements of a one-page story? Or comments, thoughts? Anything you want to add, Nancy dear?
No.
Okay.
I love how you have like multiple photos, it seems like sometime, because I need to see the ancestor and see the situation too. It seems like it comes alive to the kids with that.
Yeah, we want to see the ancestor, And sometimes it's nice to see him in different stages of life too, isn't it, Nat?
Yeah.
See him as a youngster. So you realize sometimes we imagine that our ancestors were born old, because by the time we knew them, they were. And believe it or not, all of us had childhoods. So, yeah. Go ahead, Brent.
I expect sometimes you're tempted to go over one page. Do you tend to try to make tiny type?
Let me address the clear part of that first, which is tiny type. We have a standard. Notice the standard is we put the person who's featured at the very top. Their name is always at the top. This one is about Dale Francis Thacker. This one's about Ben Goddard. So we always have their name at the top, and we always underline it. And then we have a title, and the title is a little bit larger type to feature it. And we should have had our favorite graphic designer advise us on this, but this is what we've come up with. And then we've used 12 point throughout, 12 point times New Roman as the font. So Brent, your question is, are you ever tempted to reduce the font size so you can get more into the story? And actually some of them it's hard, like when we have Ben in the Bureau of Information, wow, we could go on 10 pages on that. But having taken the challenge of telling the essence of the story in one page, we would tell at least a chapter of it in one page. And then if there's an addendum like the growth of the work, that would come in a separate one. Now we haven't done that one, though we could. We could do another one pager about his 27 years leading the effort and what they did, and maybe show some of the pamphlets he created and the effort. You know, the thing that sparked the Bureau of Information was when Leroy Snow heard one of the tourists being taught by a tour guide. He pointed to the Beehive House and said, the prophet of the LDS Church lives there, and nobody knows what happens in there. Well, a lot of times they eat breakfast and lunch and dinner, and they talk and they read books. And so Leroy Snow happened to be walking by when one of these guides told this story. And so Leroy stepped up to the carriage that they were in and said, would you guys like to come in and meet my dad? And the guide said, don't go, you may not come out. So they went in. And they went in and met Lorenzo Snow and found him to be quite a pleasant man, and met his wife too, whose name I don't recall. And so there's more we could tell of the story. And so we always put those then in separate one-pagers and try to make a discrete chapter out of every one-pager. But that's been our rule, is that they're never more than a page, so that if you want to tell a family story at the breakfast table, it's never going to be one of those that goes on for decades. It's never going to be one of those where you go, okay, we got it. That is explicitly what we'd like to avoid. So sometimes we have multiple chapters, and Nancy, I guess we need to write about how the Bureau of Information became the big work it did, and Ben was involved for 27 years.
That's a book.
Yeah, that is. And I have loved studying that book. And Andy helped us create an AI image of Ben at his retirement. They had a retirement party for him at the Bureau. And we have the booklet that was signed by many of the general authorities honoring him for his decades of work at the Bureau. And so we don't have, of course, a picture of that reception, and I haven't found any in the church archives, which I keep scouring. Oh, and
That's what Max did.
see what Max created?
Oh my goodness, a 3D printed version of it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Isn't that terrific? That's
First visitor center in the world.
Yeah, it is the predecessor of all of our effort to tell our story at our areas of interest, temples and historic sites.
That is awesome.
So, Max, thanks for what you've created, brother. I have one like that, but a little bit bigger, that sits on the shelf at our house on permanent display along with Ben's journal and his kiwi, because man, I love Ben. I love that guy. And
What's
I'm
that a
so
model of?
grateful for him. Pardon?
What is that a model of?
So that's a model of that. I don't know if you can see, Brian, in that picture there is that Bureau of Information. That was the original bureau on Temple Square, built in 1902.
Oh, wow.
And Ben had to raise the money for it. Ben and his colleagues had to raise the money for it. $600 then, which would be thousands of dollars now. They raised the money and had it built and opened on August the 4th, 1902. And started sharing pamphlets and giving tours of Temple Square and answering people's questions
Got it.
in order to prevent the dissemination of these falsehoods that had been so often. You know, the taxi drivers, the hack drivers as they called them, would take people around town. The more lurid the stories they told, the better the tips they got. So there were some pretty good stories told about what the Latter-day Saints do in those temples, about sacrificing young virgins and all kinds of stories that are just ridiculous. So we are pretty serious about this, telling the story, and I'm grateful for the Max has lent his talents to the effort. And Natalie, you had a comment.
I was just thinking that the 1-page limit always makes the kids, I feel like the kids always feel like, oh, I can go and find something about one of my ancestors for this assignment or for this youth camp or this FSY or whatever, and it doesn't feel overwhelming to them. I think if we did not hold to that standard, they might just not feel as safe. But it always feels safe and accessible to them, I feel like, and we would read it on road trips. We would like, okay, on the way down to St. George, we're going to read a couple, and we're going to read a couple on the way back, and we would read them and talk about them, and it becomes real.
I think it's really a smart thing. I mean, Joyce put together some notebooks with lots of information about her ancestors, and she went through a lot of work and put together a notebook for each of our children for Christmas. A number of notebooks. There's a dozen of them.
At least, more like 20.
Oh,
Of
really?
different
Well,
ancestors.
Well, and some are like the 3-word stories that we did about our family.
We did the 3 words, but those notebooks, I'm frankly not sure most of our kids have opened any of them.
And there's,
I know some have, but it's rare.
I don't know if you remember that we created the Goddard Legacy book, and we had in it key documents and photographs, and we also had chronologies and some family histories, and over the years, after distributing 100 and some odd of those to family members, over the years, I only found evidence that one person had opened, and that was Richard Goddard. When he said, I was reading the story of so-and-so in the book the other day, and I thought, Richard, bless you. And I don't doubt that others have opened it, maybe used it at times, but a book like that is so daunting. And I think it's important to be done, because I think it provides the resources for those who want to dig deeper. But I think it's 1-page stories that bridge the gap and draw people from their not knowing and maybe not even being especially interested. It draws them from there across the bridge to caring deeply and knowing who they are and identifying with them and saying, I am part Ben Goddard, I am part Harold E. Wallace, that's me and my story. That's part of my identity.
And maybe wanting to know more.
Yeah, want to know more. And that's maybe what will get them to dig into maybe when they get to be our age. I mean, Nancy and I are pawing through things like that all the time. So as we get to maybe older, more interested, more mature, and maybe have more time, we dig into those things, and we're now saying, one of the things we love to create are chronologies. A chronology is where we start a Word document and show the date of every event or document or picture we can establish for a given ancestor. So we've done chronologies for Ben and Percy and Verna, and Harold E. Wallace's chronology stands at 212 pages. Because during the time Harold E. Wallace, during the 14 years he was county attorney, and he actually was deputy county attorney before that, so it's more than 14 years. But anyway, he was in the newspaper virtually every single day, and sometimes in multiple papers, telling about what they were doing in the county attorney's office. So we didn't type that whole article. We just summarized it in a paragraph. That he was, for instance, he would submit grants to the federal government to bring money for jobs to Utah because he was so worried about these people he saw in the streets who were jobless and homeless. So a chronology can serve a very useful purpose of giving the skeleton of a person's life. And so when Percy wrote a letter to Verna, it appears in both of their chronologies. When Percy goes on a mission, we put important events there. We also, I've typed every word in Percy's journal and in Ben's journal from their missions. So there are all those amazing resources, but we think the one-pagers are the entryway into family history. So I admire and love what you've done, and would say that there's maybe the bridge that might make it even more used is to extract some one-page stories. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
I just was thinking,
Brian?
my mother passed in January, February, early February. We're having her memorial, her 1-year memorial. Let's say, I guess it was February. Anyway, I'm kind of mixed up on the dates, but we're having a memorial for her in June. And this is a great way that I can engage. My sister asked me if I would put together all the photos and and everything else to help with tell her story. And I thought, this is a great way I can engage all of our extended family to ask them to put together one-page stories from all the things that they've learned from her or learned about her and so forth.
Amen.
Yeah, boy, that's really, I'm so glad I got to hear about this.
Yeah, I think the one-page stories are the bite-size, if somebody plops down textbook length story, you just think, oh wow, someday I'll get to that, and goes to the shelf, and every time you move it gets moved, but it probably doesn't get read. But one-page stories, and then we, of course, and I'll mention this ahead, we post them all to Family Search so that for generations to come they can be found associated with that person.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we've just passed 600 items uploaded to Family Search. Pictures, but one-page stories. And I'm not especially good at the research part, at tracing the tree, but we've been very dedicated to telling the stories. We think that's the number one thing that will bind the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest the whole earth be smitten with a curse, as Malachi prophesied.
Do you have a book of one-page stories for each?
Well, boy, Brent, you ask good questions.
Can I borrow that?
You surely may.
I'd like to make copies of that.
So, one of the things we do is we've equipped each of our children, and in our case we have just 3 cherished children, and we don't know how to get them to our miscarriages who are in the spirit world. So we provide our living children with the binder, and we put the stories in plastic pages, and then we also update the index every year. And this index is kind of like a pedigree chart, but it lists what stories we have for each person. And it becomes really clear to us who's been neglected. And the fact is that those who are closer to us in time, we have more stories. Some of these people back here, we don't have many stories. We really wish we did have more, but we're grateful for those stories we do have. So this is what, that's what it looks like. There's mine, and there's Nancy's, and then Andy and Natalie have one, and Sarah and Mike, and also, of course, Emily and her family have one.
This is amazing. It's as you talk about this, I think of all the times I've asked or hear people in our family and extended family, children, now our grandchildren, asking questions about our ancestors, and particularly on the Lakota side, nothing was written.
Yeah.
But some of the stories are remembered, and and that's what they really cherish. So
Yeah.
to have a framework like this, kind of a template and a simple one and we do have some photos. Anyway, it's interesting. So this
And
is
having
a
those
great
stories
thing.
recorded means that they won't be lost in the next generation.
Yeah, because they're
'Cause they get-
this close to being lost forever at this point.
Yeah.
It's like my grandmother, and then they with my grandmother and great grandmother and grandfather, great grandpa. They were the first to go to Carlisle Indian School. So when, as you know, as we settled the West, obviously a lot of the Native Americans were displaced, and a lot of the children were taken from the tribes and sent to Indian schools to learn the language and and so forth. But but there's a lot of trauma around all that, and there's a lot of stories and everything. But most of that is, I mean, it's this close to being lost, the history, but there's enough there now to write one pagers. I know that because I've heard a lot of the stories. So that's really
This close
neat.
to being lost. That's
Yeah.
that's the key
Yeah,
the key statement, isn't it, Brian?
yeah.
And so there's a good reason you're here today.
Yeah, I had no idea. I got an email from Randy and thought, oh, that sounds pretty interesting. I've just been feeling little promptings about getting involved in family history, and I've left it to my sister and my dad, who is a professional genealogist, and my sister's been, but the Spirit's just kind of been, kind of pricking me a little bit, saying, no, we all need to participate.
And sometimes, not always, but sometimes the professional genealogists want to do the research that make the connections, and they want to tell the whole life story at book length. And I think it's one-page stories that bind hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And so hopefully our children, grandchildren, and yet to be great-grandchildren will feel this connection to their heritage. They'll say, wow, it means something to be a part of this family. And of course, in each family, it's a different meaning, but it means something, and we ought to think about what it means. Any thoughts, Brent? Any questions about what that looks like?
No, I think it's a beautiful thing.
And I should note that Nancy and I know that maybe the most important contribution we can make to our family is to tell the stories. We don't have bucket loads of cash in our basement, so we aren't able to buy each grandchild a big gift. So what we do is spend our time gathering and writing stories, figuring that that's the most important legacy we could leave for our grandchildren. And I can't imagine what Christmas would be like if you tried to buy a gift for every one of your descendants, and it would be pretty daunting. Well, so this is a quote from Bruce Feiler, who studied the work of Duke and Fivush. He says this: the bottom line, if you want a happier family, anybody here interested in that? If you want a happier family, create, refine, and retell the story of your family's positive moments and your ability to bounce back from the difficult ones. That act alone may increase the odds that your family will thrive for many generations to come. I think the research is unequivocal that having stories of resilience, having stories of determination of character makes a really big difference for our descendants. So knowing our heritage and feeling, oh, there are others who have faced challenges and they've done it in wise and good ways, and I can learn from them. What a great heritage. So this is, you've got the binder in hand, Brent. This is what it looks like. On the cover, I have put the 4 primary lines. I'm a product of Goddard's and Wallace's. Nancy's a product of Thacker's and Woodward's. And now, of course, as you go back, there are more lines, but those are the feeder lines that come right to us. And so we copy the stories, put them in plastic pages, and deliver them to our children each Christmas. And then we provide an updated index. We make a new index, and we post them on Family Search so that they'll always be available. So how do we use them? Natalie, does that sound familiar? We use them to spark a dinner table conversation.
Yeah.
We share at family gatherings. We use his bedtime stories, read them in the car as you travel. Andy and Natalie have at times done that especially well. I think especially when the children were younger, you might grab the book as you jump in the car for a trip of medium or greater length, and you can have family members read the stories. You can use them in school and church talks. Abby, we had a conversation about, weren't you writing a report for school?
Yeah, I was doing an ancestor research paper on Ben Goddard.
On Ben Goddard.
It was just so cool to like learn and like use all the information that you would put on Family Search and like all the pictures and stuff. It was just really like great experience.
Yeah. Don't you love that guy? Yeah. And so as Abby does a report on Ben, he'll become a significant person in her life. He'll become important to her, and hopefully she'll feel the legacy. We create games like charades. Emily has created, we'll talk about that in a minute. She's created a Jeopardy game where she takes questions from the one-pagers, and we ask them when we have an annual family reunion. And it's great because the kids get to compete to see who can remember, and Nancy and I try to give just enough hints to each team so that we always come out with a tie score, because the object is not to beat each other but to learn about each other. Great Christmas gifts. Okay, I should tell you a little about this story. I think you know that one, Brent, about how our mild-mannered, sweet, gentle, kind grandma, Lottie Lorene Hill Wallace, was washing the dishes as was her custom. Grandpa was playing like he was helping. He was there with a dish towel, occasionally drying a dish, but in between drawings, he was flipping Grandma's backside. And she said, "Harold, stop." And he did not stop. He kept flipping her periodically, and those who have had a backside effectively flipped probably still remember it and may have scars from the experience. When done well with a slightly damp cloth, it can leave quite an impression. Anyway, so Grandma, who was famously mild-mannered, much like Nancy, not a loud, outspoken, direct, violent kind of person, but a very mild, gentle, kind of person. So Grandpa kept flipping her, and finally she got the bucket of water that was in the sink and turned around and doused Harold E. Wallace, who was wearing his white shirt and tie. And the daughters who were in the room stood in absolute awe and wonder. They had never seen their mother do something quite as direct as that. And so the story stands in memory as "Don't Tease Your Wife" story. And it also tells you a lot about Grandma and Grandpa, doesn't it? Grandpa was always a tease. He loved to joke and tease. And Grandma was always sweet and mild, unless you kept flipping her backside, in which case she responded. So it's one more story, one of about 70 stories that helps us to know who these people are and what they're all about. So, I don't know if you recognize, Brent, in that bottom picture, Harold E. Wallace with Cal Rawlings, the man. It's so funny, these two guys, they both worked at Saltaire together for many years. They both married about the same time. They were both judges or county attorneys at overlapping times in Salt Lake County. And then they started a law practice together. And so Cal and Harold were just best of friends. And I have letters that were written by Cal to Harold. And I think, what a sweet thing that you can work together for your entire adulthood and love and admire each other. It's a beautiful thing. I had to write a one-pager about their relationship because it was sweet. Above,
Do we have any connection with the Rawlings family? Do they?
No blood connection, I know, Brent.
Any.
Oh, do we still have?
Do they are aware of our family? Are they aware of?
Wow, that's such a good question. Not that I'm aware of, not that I know of, though we should have. And of course, Harold died a lot younger than Cal. Cal lived to be like 90, and Harold lived to be, I think, 72 or something like that. And so their family trajectory is a little different in terms of their history. But how nice it would be if we had a connection with them. And one nice thing, when we post things on Family Search, like for instance, this last week, the Spurrier family brought me a big bucket of stuff that they didn't know what to do with. They didn't want to throw it away, and they didn't want to process it, so what do? You give it to Wally. And you figure Wally will go through it all, and so I did. I spent probably 3 full days, long days, hard days, going through each paper and each picture, and you start to find little gems in the midst of them. And then the reason I mention it is because I found a wedding picture, and it said on the back that it was Jessie, who was Uncle Stan's sister. And I looked up, and Uncle Stan's sister was named Phyllis. So I'm thinking, either she had a nickname or there's a misidentification here. So I thought, I don't know which. So I scanned it and posted it on Family Search and found who had been posting other pictures for Stan's sister. And the person, I found that there was a woman, I can't remember her name now, who had been posting about Stan's sister. So I sent her a message through Family Search. I sent her an email and said, I found this picture and I wonder if you know who this is. And she said, she wrote back, she sent me an email yesterday and she said, well, that's Stan's aunt. She was misidentified. It is Phyllis, but it was his aunt, not his sister. And so whoever wrote on the back of the picture was mistaken. And so I changed the identification, and that picture became the very first thing posted on Phyllis's profile. And I feel so sad that here's a woman, Phyllis, a beautiful woman, it's a beautiful picture, and nobody knows her, or at least probably in the current generation, she's disappeared entirely. Now it could be that her family are not Latter-day Saints and don't use Family Search. But Family Search is there so we can keep up connection, so that we as a people can be bound to each other and to God. And
what did she say?
The lady, when she wrote, she said, "You've made my day.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
You've made my day." And I hope I've helped her build a connection between generations of her descendants. And wow.
You found another picture.
Yeah. And have any of you heard of Ruthie? So we wrote a book about Ruthie and her story and dying young of pneumonia. And her story is really about her and her grandfather Alonzo Davis Wallace. Alonzo Davis Wallace. He was the 35th of 46 children of George B. Wallace. How many one-on-ones do you think he got with his dad as the 35th of 46 children? I'm guessing he didn't get many one-on-ones. And I'm guessing part of the reason he was so close to Ruthie is because he was so unknown with his own grandfather and father, and so he became the best friends of Ruthie. So for years I've wanted to find a picture of Ruthie and Alonzo together. I've never found one until in this bucket of stuff from the Spurriers was a picture Aunt Ann had of Ruthie with her grandfather. And what's funny is, in most pictures where someone's holding Ruthie, she's got her elbow between her and them so she could look around. With Alonzo, she doesn't. She loved her grandfather, and he loved her. And she felt completely safe in his arms and his life. So, wow, it was 3 days of hard labor, and I got a picture, which of course I've scanned and posted, because
Where
I
is
want
that?
everyone to have
Is that,
access to that picture.
It's under Ruby and Alonzo.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it should be cross-referenced. Yeah, thank you, Nancy. So you recognize, maybe, that some Goddards would recognize that the picture in the top left is Ben Goddard in the back. You recognize Ben sitting kind of comfortably back there. But with two of the Maori people he taught and loved in Pororua, who came to the United States. Years later, when the man died, Ben went with the wife back to New Zealand so that they could have a memorial for him, who had been a chieftain of the people in New Zealand. But there's the family gathered, and some of the neighbors, and they're gathered just enjoying a pleasant summer evening in Immigration Canyon behind the green cabin. So Ben here, and that's Emma, and here's Martha Alice, and I think their sister, there's Emma Jane, and there's Martha Alice, and then they had another sister who lived down in central Utah, and I can't remember her name right now. And these are neighbors and friends, and I assume they brought the baby as well. But wow, having spent a lot of my childhood years in this very, very spot, enjoying the Immigration Canyon, I just love seeing them there. And I think of the spirit they brought to the canyon because of the love they had for each other. You'll see when, what's her, I should remember the sister's name. So she lived in central Utah, stayed down in Meadow, and so they would go to visit, and when they went, it's a long, dusty drive on dirty, slow roads, and then they would stop when there was a pool of water. Now you'll notice that the women had dusters on their hats. So they put the dusters over their faces to keep the dust off of them as they drove down these dusty, dirty roads going down to central Utah. Think how times have changed. But here they are taking a break and cooling off their feet on this long, hot drive. And then here's a city girl, Marilyn Woodward, who's out visiting her boyfriend, Dale Francis Thacker, in Vernal, Utah. And she got a chance to ride horses for the first time when she was visiting Vernal. I mean, these pictures tell stories, don't they? Well, part of what I would say is not all stories are told on paper. One-pagers we obviously consider very precious and important, but not all stories are told on paper. We think also they can be told on walls. So for instance, here's a display in Emily's house that she has in her entry. Some of her ancestors and a family tree there. Here's, that was a few years ago in our living room. We've got the painting of Nancy's grandparents when they went on their honeymoon in 1922, September of 22, up in the mountains fishing because they couldn't afford to do anything more than that. So they rode their horses up in the mountains and went fishing for their honeymoon. I'm not sure if Grandma loved that as much as Grandpa did, but I think she was like Nancy, very adaptable.
Papa, can you go back
Surely.
to, and I'll get that.
This?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we thought that we'd like to put a family tree in our living room, so we got this birch tree, a branch of a birch tree, and cut it to match our ceiling, the curve of our ceiling. And then I thought I'd be really clever and cut off sections of it and put it in the bookshelf so it looked like it's going clear through the bookshelf and into the floor. And I patted myself on the back for quite a while about that. And then we put my side of the family on the left side and Nancy's on the right side. But see, that's nice, but it doesn't tell stories. That was the problem, is it doesn't tell you much detail about any person. But we loved it. We loved it because we love all those people. And so Nancy and I loved it, but then we decided to tell, for instance, Ben's story. So there's the Kiwi he brought home from New Zealand in 1895, and there's his journal on the counter and some of the shells he collected on the beaches near Pororua, New Zealand. And there are some of the documents, like for instance, one of those, there's the family picture on the bottom set of images. There's the family picture, and then there's a letter he wrote to his son, J. Percy Goddard, in 1892. And he writes to him variously. At one point he wrote, "My beloved son," and he writes to his only child and tells him about his experiences in New Zealand. The next is his retirement book, and then a picture of him and his wife, and one of the pieces of craft that she made in order to support him and the family while he was on his mission. Well, then here's how we told the story of Harold E. Wallace, and we found where he had signed a document, and we had it cut in vinyl and stuck that to the wall. So you have his signature on the wall together with some of the documents and pictures of his 5 surviving daughters, and some of the things that were important to him, including his projector where he would show family movies on the wall, movies that of course we then edited and posted on YouTube. The typewriter used in his law practice, the family Bible that he'd inherited. So we like to have the stories told in our home, in our living space, as a reminder of who these people are and how important they are to us. There's the one about Dale Francis Thacker, Nancy's dad, and on the top shelf we have his childhood, and the bottom shelf we have his adulthood. And so in his childhood, you'll notice we have his actual primary bandolo. From in the olden days, you get a bandolo and you'd put, as you accomplish different things in primary, you'd put these little plastic treasures on it, and you felt so cool, kind of like you're a general in Saudi Arabia or something. And also the statue he made out of shoemaking equipment, and on the right is a purse that he made out of a dead raccoon, and his Silver Beaver Award. And then in the top right, if you're very perceptive, you'll see a picture of burnt cookies, because his motto was, "It's perfectly good. It's perfectly good." So no food was so old or so ruined that it couldn't still be eaten. It's perfectly good. When people would attempt to throw away something they thought was no good, they would say, "Ah, it's perfectly good. I'll eat it." So the story of Dale, or this is one that I really enjoyed, it with J. Percy Goddard on the left and Verna Lyle Wright Goddard on the right, and the dress she made herself for her wedding in the Salt Lake Temple in 1912, in December of 1912. And we have their names on the wall. I got a map through through eBay, a map of Germany at the time Percy was there in 1900 as a missionary. And I put postcards of the places he was in. I have some of his postcards, and I have pictures and his old camera. And intriguingly, there's a trophy, because Verna won an award for outstanding music at a concert. She won the first place, and there's a picture of her with a trophy, but I don't have the trophy, so I got a different one on eBay that represents as a stand-in for it. There are some of the books that Percy actually read, and so for a year, from one Christmas to the next, we honored J. Percy Goddard, and when our family would come to visit, we would invite them to recognize these things and talk about what they mean and why they're important to us. Here's Nancy's mom. The funniest thing about that is that when our neighbor Richard came to visit us with his dog, the dog came in and immediately took to barking at Marilyn, because he thought that was a little bit spooky, having Marilyn standing there in her uniform ready to inoculate him. And so poor little Bailey just went berserk. But we've tried to tell Marilyn's story, things she collected and loved, and her community service award and some of her badges from, that's the actual dress she wore when she graduated in 1947 from the University of Utah in nursing. And so things that represent her that could help our children and grandchildren know who she is and what she stood for. And then this was last year's. Last year we tried to tell the story of our children and their growing up, from the time on the far left Nancy and I were married until on the far right the time that Sarah, our youngest, was married. And so there are items made by or used by our children from the time they were born till the time they got married, including some of Andy's graphic design projects. We love the things that Andy has created, and some of the sewing that Emily did, and the ceramics that Sarah did, and the wood box that Andy made when he was a little guy. And we love those things, and they are great reminders to us of these people we love more than life itself. So that was our display last year, and it's worth noting that on the far left is our first zip line, and we had zip lines in, I think, 5 houses. And then on the far right is our last zip line, and in between there is a string stretched, and there's a picture of Andy with a pulley that was made with a 3D printer by Max. And if you're perceptive, you can see Andy right there. We cut out a picture of Andy on a zip line and attached it to this pulley that Max made, and there's a string running across here from one tree house to the other. So we've tried to make the displays fun and interesting, but also tried to tell the stories so that people, especially our family, would always remember what mattered to us. In my office, when Mom passed away, remember in 2018, and we met at Beth's house, and we each had a chance to pick some of the things that Mom had left that we loved and wanted to keep. And I got Mom's pins from when she was at the University of Utah, and I don't know that they weren't valuable anyway, except that it tells how Mom always liked to be involved. She was a part of a flying club at the University of Utah, and to my knowledge, Mom was never a pilot, but maybe she loved pilots, I don't know. But Mom was just a person who loved to be involved, and so I had some of her pins, and I thought, I'm going to make a display about my mom. But then I thought, hold it, Mom didn't just sprout up out of nowhere. So I thought I'd include her family. So on the bottom left are pictures about her family, including, you see the push broom there. That's the reminder of that story about the street sweeper. And there are pictures, miniature versions of the posters that Harold E. Wallace had when he ran for county attorney. There are other various things that represent important parts of the story. And of course, we added Dad and his family, including the Emigration Canyon cabin that was so important to our family. And then their time together. Now, I don't know. I'm not saying this is the right way, but I am saying that if this is a way you like to share family history, it can bring a lot of happiness. It has for me. And it's a permanent collection in my office. Not all of those things, like for instance, some of those things we don't have the originals, but we're able to recreate them. Like Dad's toolbox wouldn't fit in here, but I made a replica that's a scale model of Dad's toolbox, and some miniature loaves of bread, like Mom was a bread maker. And here is, we have an article where Mom wrote for the Deseret News about bread making. And so I took that article and reduced it in size and printed it out and put it in the typewriter, because Mom wrote about bread making, and she wrote over 500 articles for the Deseret News and Salt Lake Tribune about food and eating and recipes. So when our grandkids come to visit, we can make them supper by telling them stories about their ancestors. And I think the visual experience helps them remember. So we've tried to not just store stuff in the attic or in the basement, but actually use the things that we've inherited to tell the stories of our ancestors. So do you recognize that, Natalie? Does that look at all familiar? So that's in the hallway just out here. One way that Andy and Natalie have honored their ancestors. And here's upstairs in the hallway, the way they've told the story of their living family. I think it's beautiful, and Andy's talent as a graphic designer is evident. This is one of my favorite things that I've created, where I tried to tell the story of Ben Goddard and do it on a piece of mat board, and then I cut out some of the pictures from Family Search, and from Ben, the youngest, in about 1856, in the top left corner. And what's funny is I went to RootsTech, and at RootsTech I took this picture. It was a glass picture, and I thought it was Ben's mother. And I said, could this be Ben's mom? He said, oh, that's a little boy, that's not a girl. And I said, a little boy? And the guy said, yeah, in that era, boys always parted their hair on the side and girls in the middle. That's a boy. And then he said, let me look at the picture. And he looked at it and looked at the way, it was this piece of glass with what looked like dust on the back. And I scanned it at a high resolution and then sent it off and had it processed and came up with that image. And the guy at Family Search, or at RootsTech, said that picture would have been taken about 1856, because the type of picture, photography was in rapid transition back in that era as they learned how to create pictures. He said that would have been about 1856, and Ben would have been 5 years old. And so we have that picture of Ben and the two sisters that he ultimately married. There's Ben with Allie, Martha Alice. And then I used stock pictures of crossing the ocean and the girls working in the linen mill and him as a Methodist circuit preacher. And then we have pictures of the choir in Meadow, where he sang with the choir. They were sealed in the St. George Temple before it had a taller tower. And there's Percy, their beloved and only son. And of course, those who know the family history know that Ben almost certainly had the chromosomal translocation that has kept me and Nancy from having more than 3 children and given us 20-something miscarriages. But he had in a whole lifetime 1 child, and I remember Percy, one thing I remember from our home teaching visits is he said, John A. Woodsoe used to say to me, because he was good friends with John A. Woodsoe, he'd say, John Woodsoe would say, Percy, you had 2 mothers, and it's surprising you're not more spoiled than you are. 2 mothers and an only child. So then a Whare Karakia, there, a house of prayer in New Zealand where he served, and some of the shells that he actually collected when he was in New Zealand. Then the first Bureau of Information, the later development of the Bureau into a lovely building and ultimately a museum. And then picture of the family in 1925. So he lived from the time of Abraham Lincoln through the Civil War, through the arrival of the Statue of Liberty, and clear up to the Great Depression. And so this puts in historical context what happened. And a lot of those things are from historical sources from the internet, but there are a few pictures of Ben that help put his life in historical perspective. That's one of my favorite pieces, because I walk by that in the hall every day and I think, I love this guy. I love this guy. Now, which ancestor you choose to honor and how you choose to honor him is unique and individualized, but the idea of memorializing those who mean the most to us is, I think, really important. So, here in our home also, I've got, Nancy has that display on her piano. That's a dress that her mother made for her, and she's wearing in the picture at the right, bottom right. She's wearing that dress in the picture with her brother. And so she's got images of things that are important to her. And then I have this display in my office of ancestors. I see my 3-part mission as to thank, to create, and to serve. A 3-part mission. So ancestors are an important part of that. And then you see our family over here on the right side. And then behind them are pictures of people that I picked up in antique stores, and I have no idea who they are. But I think God expects us to be reaching out to people we pass in our lifetime. People who now may be strangers, but God expects us to serve people we pass. So that's one way I've tried to display our family. And then on Pinterest, there's so many great ideas about how to create displays. So on my Pinterest account, under Family History Display and Activities, I've pinned about 200 ideas. And I haven't done most of them, but some of them have inspired me to try different things. And I recommend that if you're interested in doing a display that honors your ancestors, you're a creative type. You ought to create something that honors your ancestors, huh? And I think what Liza makes will be different from anything I've ever made, but better in its own way. So if you want ideas, Pinterest has, of course, packed with them. So maybe you choose to tell stories on wall, maybe not, but we've said you can tell stories in one-pagers, you can tell them on your walls, and then you can also tell them face to face. And I don't know, Andy, if you remember when we used to on Sunday afternoons after church, we'd go over and sit down at Grandma and Grandpa's house. We'd have dinner at our house, and then we'd go over there, and Grandpa'd sing some songs, and sometimes you kids would be playing with blocks or toys or whatever, but you kids would get to hear Grandpa sing and maybe hear some of his stories. And I like to think that makes a difference. And I know, in fact, Nancy, what was it that Sue recently said about Grandpa?
Lori said.
Was it Lori?
That he was just a happier person after we moved there and started talking to him and listening to his stories.
I think Grandpa was probably kind of lonely and a little bit disconnected, but when we moved to Vernal and lived just around the corner from them and visited them every Sunday, and they often came to our house and stopped by and talked to us, I think it made a difference for Grandpa, for Leslie Price Thacker. I think it made him feel more connected, more valued, more appreciated, more seen. And so that's one of the side benefits of family history. You remember a few years ago, Andy and Natalie, when we went to Vernal and we stood in front of the Curry house where we used to live, and we pulled out the photo album that we brought with us and showed pictures of Andy in his western town and the kids in the tree house and the girls in their bedroom with their little tea party. And so going to the places and visiting them, we had our reunion that year out at Greens Lake and Flaming Gorge, and then visited Vernal and got to, you're never quite sure how much the grandkids will remember, but hopefully they remember the places, and then as they read the stories, they say, oh yeah, I remember that house. For me, the Curry house has a flood of great memories, and I hope it does for our children. Well, and then Andy and Natalie invited us to go with them when they went to England. They said, would you tell the stories of our ancestors? So in England, this is in Rashcliffe, Huddersfield, Yorkshire, England, which is where Ben was from, and we don't have a street address, but we know he lived in the neighborhood of Rashcliffe. So we went to Rashcliffe, and here we went up above the neighborhood, up on a hillside, and what was great, I don't know if you remember that there were blackberries that were in full fruit, and so the kids were able to pick blackberries and eat fresh, delicious blackberries while I told them stories of their ancestors. And overall, I think they were more interested than they appear in this picture. Though I guess it could be debated. But we tried to tell not whole histories, but stories, anecdotes about Ben and who he was and what he did. And then we also, in fact, I think that's the next picture, we created a book in the top left there, Finding the Path Our Ancestors Walked. We made a Shutterfly book about our trip, because we know that maxim from psychology is true, that what people rehearse is what they remember. We remember what we rehearse, and hopefully having a book would make that trip stand out more than any other trip. And you've been to a lot of places. I don't know how many countries you've been to already, Liza and Abby and Max, but hopefully having the book and revisiting it with pictures of yourselves in those places will help you connect your ancestors. That's our hope. And then we wrote the book Ruthie about sweet little Ruthie and her loving relationship with her grandfather Alonzo Davis Wallace. One of the things I thought was interesting, when I have a transcription of the funeral program for Alonzo, and I thought, great, finally I can get a story about Alonzo. So I carefully read through every page of the funeral program, the typed funeral program. Not one story. People would say we were so glad to have the Wallace family in our ward, but not a single story. My guess is, just my theory, is that Alonzo, as the 35th of 46 children, kind of didn't get seen a lot. And he was always kind of a quiet one in the background. And people didn't have stories to tell him because he didn't stand out. But he stood out for Ruthie. Because when little Ruthie needed a companion and a friend and a playmate, her grandfather finally found an opportunity to really make a difference for somebody, an enduring difference, and they became best of friends. Their little trips to Liberty Park and their loving relationship is the story told in the book Ruthie. And I could say that we recommend that you make a storybook about one of your ancestors, but I would be lying if I recommended that. It's quite a process.
Well, with AI nowadays, it's much more manageable.
Okay, that's good. What we did with Andy's help, we hired an artist in Alabama. He did the artwork. We worked with an editor in Logan and spent probably a couple hundred hours trying to refine the story with Andy's maxim in mind that you've got to tell a story. And so anyway, we worked on that for a long time, sent it to China, where we printed, was it 1,000 or 2,000? I can't remember. But I love the book, but I'd say that was an arduous process, and thank heaven it's maybe gotten easier. When at RootsTech this year, there were some people who showed us how they made little miniature books. They found ways to make little tiny books, and think how much fun kids would have having one of those tiny books with the story about an ancestor. I mentioned earlier about Jeopardy, Emily creating the Jeopardy game and using facts from the family stories. And so when we gather in a family reunion, people can say, I want family history for 300 points. And then they get asked a question and the team can confer and discuss. And as I said, we try to give just enough hints that it brings back answers for the family and we can end in a tie.
I love that you can do it this way with the paper, but we've also done it with the Jeopardy online thing where you just put in, you just type in the
You
answers.
do it electronically,
and
can't you?
and
And that's
do it
how
on a
we've
big
done it more
screen.
recently. I don't know that I have a picture of that, but that's good, Nat. There's so many resources available now, aren't there, to help you do these things. Who's that, Abby? Isn't Abby cute? There she is. That's her great-great-grandmother. This is Stella Vernon Thacker, Nancy's grandmother, her beloved grandmother. And I think there's a pretty good resemblance there, don't you?
I thought maybe it was an AI, transformation there or something that's similar enough.
Yeah, so we brought with us, when we were staying with the family, watching the kids, we brought a picture of Stella Vernon Thacker, and then Nancy helped Abby get dressed up fairly similarly, and I think it's really fun to see your connection to Stella. And by the way, Stella was a kind, gentle soul who loved Nancy more than life itself. She was the granddaughter who replaced the daughter she lost, and she loved Nancy with all her heart. So we hope that that's a feeling that you'll always carry with you, that you're connected. We also did one of Eliza, and who were we matching Eliza to, Nancy? Do you remember? Mariah Jane Johnston, yeah. And I didn't put that picture in here, but that was another one we did. And you know about the Compare a Face app on the Family Search, or in the Family Search app. And so it says, I'm 91% like my dad, though I did not enjoy the benefit of his nose, which would have made me far more distinguished looking. So, a concluding story about a gathering. I'm not sure quite how it came about. I think you girls, you and your sisters said we ought to, I think Nancy especially said we ought to celebrate Dale Francis Thacker's 100th birthday. Is that right, Nancy? And they said we ought to honor Dad. And so he was a real quiet man who I think wasn't always, he sometimes kind of hid in the background. But he passed away in 2014. But we thought we ought to honor him. And so Andy and Natalie opened their house for us. And we had, right where you're sitting now, a gathering in which we told many of his stories. We gathered as many of the descendants as could come, given snow and distance. We gathered, how many people did we have? Do you remember?
60 plus.
60 plus, 60, 70. And we gathered and had Thanksgiving dinner together. Each person brought something to the dinner, and the kids played together, and we played some voice recordings we had of Dale, and we got to really, I think, get a feeling for this quiet, good man who had made such a difference for the family. And we were sitting in Ogden having lunch with
Well,
what?
It was Andy.
Andy what?
He's the one that told us what you're gonna say.
Was it Andy? Okay, great. I was thinking it was Alan, but so Andy pointed out that Dale, being a quiet man, this was maybe when we had this gathering was the first time Dale had felt truly seen without being talked over by all the other family members. Good observation, Andy. I'm so grateful that he can be seen and remembered. So there are a lot of different ways of doing it, but I guess my objective for sharing this is that I hope all of us just find creative and unique and personal ways of sharing our love for our heritage with our families. And it can include great books. It might include one-pagers. It might include displays in your home. There are a lot of forms it can take, but my hope is that we'll all find ways to honor our ancestors, because then we transform records into connections, which is what we want. We want the connections, not just a big pile of records somewhere, but a feeling of being connected to some good people who really made our lives richer. Oh, I did have, let me add one final story, a post story. We had a gathering up Immigration Canyon once, which was a frequent gathering place, and as we're partying, my Aunt Alice Ruth came up to me and said, "Wally, would you like to have your great-grandfather's missionary journal?" You'll never guess what I said. I said, "Let me think about it, yes." I would love to have his missionary journal, because I love great-grandpa Ben, and I love family history, and I think Aunt Ruth knew that she wasn't going to be around forever, and she needed somebody to carry it forward. So, and I had previously interviewed her a few times about our family history. So she gave me the journal, and I said, I think I'm gonna, instead of just reading through it, I want to type every word in the journal. It's only 1,054 pages. And he also, we had some letter to his family and some articles he wrote for the Deseret News and the Deseret Evening News. And so then there was a scrapbook filled with his articles. So I thought maybe every Sunday afternoon I'll type 10 pages from his journal. Now you can calculate if you do 10 pages a week and there are 1,054 pages, it takes a while. In my case, when I later went back to my calendars, I found it had taken me 3.5 years to type his 3.5-year journal. And when I finished, I felt like I had been on his mission with him. I felt like Ben and I were best of friends because I'd watched him in all these different situations. And incidentally, his mission in Pororua, he stayed essentially in Pororua almost all of his mission. And it wasn't a proselyting mission, it was primarily a service mission. He loved the people, and he taught them how to mend their clothes. He taught them to sing the songs of Zion. He taught them mathematics. He taught them whatever they needed to know to help them survive. that was what Ben Goddard did for 3.5 years, loving the people and leaving behind his family. His son, who when he left was 6 inches shorter than he, when he came home was 6 inches taller than he. I imagine that was a shock when he came home and he ran into Percy. So anyway, I typed every word into the journal, but there came the time when I read in his journal where he wrote, I received a letter from mother, but no letters from my dear family. And on this account, I was very sad and uneasy. He had been on his mission for 2 months, and he was homesick. And he was having a hard time learning the Maori language. And it was just hard to be gone from home, hard to worry about your family, hard to figure out this language that's so different from English. And I pictured Ben feeling anxious and sad. And it really touched my heart. I thought, I want to comfort him. I don't know just exactly how you comfort someone who lived 110 years earlier, but I thought, I'm gonna open the document, and I opened the document and typed a letter to Ben. And I said, Ben, you'll come home and you'll do a great work that'll change the whole course of the church. There are now more visitors, not right this minute, but because of the work on Temple Square, but on average there are more visitors to Temple Square than there are to Yellowstone National Park in a year. Can you imagine how that work has grown until we have visitor centers all over the world that really tell our story? So I wrote and I said, you're going to do a great work, and you're going to be so proud of your boy. He's going to be a good man and have a family he loves, and you're going to make a difference. So I wrote in this letter to him how much I loved him and to hold on. And I thought, I don't know how you send it. I mean, Andy may know a way to send letters back 110 years. I don't. I closed the document, and much to my surprise, I felt an immediate response. I felt him saying to me, thank you, Wally, thank you. And see, I believe that in Heavenly Father's economy, our good wishes today can bless and change the life of our ancestors. I believe that maybe somehow he got some comfort because of what I sent to him, the loving message I sent to him 110 years later. I believe we can change history by loving and caring about and telling the stories of our ancestors. It makes their lives richer and more meaningful. I don't know just how the physics of that works, but I have experienced the spiritual experience of sending messages and being blessed by it. So,
could I just comment on that?
please, go ahead, Brian.
I was thinking about reading in, I think it's 35 the other day, about how the Savior was with the people and was teaching them. And then he said he said, you're not, I can see that you're not, I don't remember exactly that word, but you're not really ready for more right now, so come back tomorrow, or on the morrow, come back. Yeah. Right? And it said that people stayed up like all night to travel to get to, do you remember that story in the book?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, but he said in the interim, I'm going to my father to take care of some business there.
Yeah.
And it appeared it wasn't just a minor transaction, there was some work that needed to be done. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? The intersection of time.
Yeah.
Overnight here and over
worlds.
there, different world. There's an entirely different time span, something happening.
Yeah.
So fascinating.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
And so somehow I think the work we do today to tell the stories and express love to our ancestors will radiate across time and space. Mm-hmm. It'll make a difference for our ancestors. And I think neither Max nor I can tell you how the physics of that works. But if all things are present with God, then the loving blessing, the loving love and admiration we send back to our ancestors, I think it makes a difference. So that's my experience anyway. That I was as shocked as anyone to find that I felt like been answered my letter. So I'd invite all of us to be sending messages to our ancestors in whatever way seems right to you. I'm confident that Natalie does that with her dear departed mom, that you send messages of love and admiration to her, and I'm confident it makes a difference for her. So, I think if you know me, you know that Ben has become a good friend, and I inserted yesterday this picture. This is the picture of Ruthie with her grandfather, and the storybook. This is the tub of stuff that was brought. That's after I started organizing it. It was a big old mess of stuff that they cleaned out of Stan's house and didn't know what to do with it. And one of the things I should have put in here is a picture of our great-great-grandfather. It's not William Henry Rhodes. What's his name? Oh, it's Thomas Naylor. Thomas Naylor. If I showed you a picture of Thomas Naylor, you'd say, that's not Thomas Naylor, that's Alan Benjamin Goddard. Because they look just alike, and they look like Harold D. Wallace too. So it's fun to trace that similarity. Anyway, I really cherish having that, finally having an image. And I don't know whether Ruthie and things for telling her story arranged for me to get all that stuff from the Spurriers. I don't know how it happens, but I am so grateful to have a picture of Ruthie with her devoted and loving grandfather. Joseph F. Smith said, those in the other world can see us more clearly than we see them, and their solicitude for us and their love for us and their desire for our well-being must be greater than that which we feel for ourselves. And I love this picture that presumably Aunt Ruth took. Notice, I assume it was accidental that Ben, great-grandpa Ben, was looking down on his grandchildren from the window of the house. Isn't that a great image of Grandpa accidentally looking in? And I think our ancestors, those we love, are looking in on us today. I think they're that involved and care that deeply. So those are the three ideas: to use stories to connect children. That's the one-pager part. The second is to create displays or remembrances in our home that will remind people, and then use them. You stop there and have a home evening and ask them to tell stories about those people, and then visit the people and the places and tell their stories, the going to the places where they live, including going to those historical places, like me going to visit Ben in New Zealand. I believe that as we start trying, that God does amazing miracles. I know when I spoke at a family conference in Australia, the guy who organized it, who happened to be a Latter-day Saint, said, Wally, as long as you're here, is there any other place you want to visit? And I said, how about New Zealand? He said, okay, I'll write an email to the stake presidents in New Zealand and see if we can connect you with any of them. And so he wrote an email, and he got a letter back from one of them who said, we'd be glad to have the Goddards come, and maybe you could do a fireside for us. And so we went there, and you'll never guess where it was. Tawa, which is the neighboring community to Pororua. Pororua is in their stake, and he was the stake president for Pororua. And his wife said, let me go get some documents. And she looked in her records, and great-grandpa Ben baptized her grandmother.
No.
And I thought, doggone it, it's amazing how I didn't have the good sense or wherewithal to organize that, but God did. And so I guess some of you might be thinking, well, God hasn't done those things for me. And I'd say, I'll bet he has, and sometimes we're not aware. I also bet that the more you turn to your ancestors, the more God will do little miracles that connect you with them. So whichever ancestor speaks to you, whichever ancestor is glowing in the dark of history, get to know them, honor them, talk to them, let them be a part of your life. And as you do, I think you'll see miracles in your life. Any questions or comments? I think that's there we are. Remember visiting Heber City at that little house? That was on one of our family gatherings.
I like the idea that with my extended family, multi-generational extended family, I think everyone here is perhaps, or maybe you're familiar with Stephen R. Covey, passed away. It's been several years now, but in his work of creating vision and mission and so forth, one of the roles that he defined for himself as a member of an intergenerational extended family, and a stewardship in that role, and I've often, so that's really resonated with me. But in my case, my intergenerational extended family is largely dispersed all over the U.S., and a lot of us don't really know each other.
Yeah.
And I was looking at all that you've done here, and not just yourself, but Nancy and others, and to look at all this and think, I wonder how I could do this to reach out and strengthen relatives, cousins, nephews, nieces, uncles, aunts that are relatively disconnected now, but I know that each has an interest in the extended family, and but is kind of struggling to find ways to connect. And I thought, we could do a lot of this stuff online together.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
I thought even putting that Jeopardy game, that you could do that using the Jeopardy thing and do it like do Zoom. There's just really kind of infinite things that you could do to do that. So I'm grateful for the inspiration today. Yeah.
Every month or two, we have a Zoom meeting with my siblings, and we catch up on each other's lives and families and try to stay connected. And I usually try to sneak in something about family history, and the family, nobody resists that. Brent and Joyce have things they share that are good also, and but boy, to just I think see ourselves as part of a larger story. If we can help create that, I think it enriches our lives. Thanks, Brian. Any other comments, questions, recriminations?
This is, I assume, the presentation you gave at RootsTech. Yeah, tell us about the response. Tell us about.
Naturally, in this setting, I provide some details that I don't always give there because it's superficially secular, but it's almost universally LDS. But there are, of course, many genealogists who come, so I try to honor that. But I can tell you that I only got 4.95 out of 5 as a rating last year, so I think that says several people. RootsTech is a great conference, and some of the sessions are incredibly technical, and some of them are sponsored. They're selling you a product, like to buy memory for keeping your family records on, or all kinds of different products and services that are sold, and some of them seem a little bit dreary to me, but several people in our session said this is the best session I attended at RootsTech, and I don't think it's because of Wally. I think it's because of the truths that we share, the truth about connections, the truth about building relationships, the truths about bringing them to your current life. There's an architect whose name I'll remember in a minute, but he said every house should have several things, and one of the things he names is a place to remember, a place to remember. And I love the idea that in our houses we create places that help us connect to our history, a place where we remember. And what's his name? Anyway, he wrote a book, House Plus Environment, and I love that idea. I also did one this year on the way we keep our own records, because I said, we get mad at our ancestors for not sending us a message. Are we sending a message forward? Are we keeping records that tell our story any better or even as well as our ancestors whom we have chided for not keeping better records? And a lot of what we keep today, we communicate digitally, and much of that evaporates. We don't leave a very good footprint with our digital communication usually. And if we're not careful, our pictures in the cloud are going to disappear when we do. And so, anyway, I talked about how we keep a record, what we do in the way of a daily record keeping, and I talked about how writing a weekly letter and trying to say, here's, in my view, a day is not a very good unit of time for finding meaning. So people who try to write in a journal every day and say, wow, here's this great lesson that came today, I think for me it never worked. It does work for me when I take a week as a unit of analysis. When I take a whole week, I can see God putting pieces together, and I can see him fitting and making sense. I can start to see part of the puzzle. So I like to write a weekly letter. When I take the time to write an annual letter, usually to Nancy, telling her how grateful I am to make the journey with her, when I paw through a whole year and write, I'm always dumbfounded. I usually sit in my office and weep, thinking, good grief, why is God neglecting everybody except us? Because the more you look for God's hand, the more you see he's blessing more than you ever realized. But I don't think we usually see it in the day-to-day, the hour-to-hour. I think we see it when we see, look what God done this year. Look what we learned this year. Look how we were stretched this year. You look at a year, I think that's a good unit of analysis, but it's a lot of work to examine a whole year and extract its lessons. And likewise, do you remember Uncle Grant, when he would dig out uranium ore and then send it off for processing, and he said out of a ton you'd get 1 or 2 pounds of uranium? Well, that seems to me kind of like life. There's a lot of fixing meals, washing dishes, doing laundry. There's a lot of stuff that ain't exactly stuff that changes lives. But there's at least 2 pounds of pure ore in every ton of life experience. And so anyway, I talked about that one about journaling, and last year I did one on building. I said that we build friendships with those who are departed the same way we build them with those who are living. And it starts with curiosity and goes through these 5 stages defined by a woman who's written about friendships, and she defines 5 stages. And so I've shown that I've shown those 5 stages, how they apply to my building a relationship with Ben and with Ruthie. And I could do it with any number of other ancestors, but I've become good friends with them by going through, from curiosity on through the different stages. So those are the 3 presentations I've done the last 3 years, 2 this year, 1 last year, 1 the year before. And if you started to suspect that family history is really important to me, you might be onto something. And I think the same is true for you, isn't it, Joyce?
Yeah.
It's really important, and you just feel what we call the spirit of Elijah, feeling an imperative in your soul that says, I have to do this. There are people counting on me to tell these stories and gather these stories.
And I feel such a great love for my ancestors.
Yeah.
And
from them too, I'll bet.
And yes, I do. I feel
Yeah, love from them and for them.
I tell you, we had a sweet experience, which unexpected sweet experience, really, going with, her sister and brother-in-law, and driving from here with them all the way back to winter quarters. And the whole way we were driving, we were telling stories about our ancestors.
Yeah.
And particularly those that had to do with, the
winter
track,
quarters
and the quarters and that
Yeah.
area, and reading them. And then on the way back, we had a book about that trek, about the saints when they were coming with Brigham Cross, and as we went, we were reading about their journey and about each section, where they stopped and what they saw and what they're experiencing and what, and my goodness, it was sweet. And then we'd stop at the visitor centers and see pictures and see, things. And then in the middle of the nowhere, we'd stop and see something that was really amazing,
And, yeah.
profound, you know, you see the chimney rock, but then all of a sudden we see this place where they moved the railroad so that they wouldn't disrupt
The graves.
the graves of some of the saints that were buried there, historically. Actually moved the railroad so that it wouldn't go over those graves. And we would see, look, in the middle of the desert there in Wyoming, I think, you could actually still see the trail where the wagons
Wagon trail.
would get
Okay,
off.
the trail.
Some of them went this way, and some of them went this way.
Yeah.
And there was a sign that would tell the story about going the two ways. And, just like you're saying, it's living it, it's experiencing it, it's spending time with it.
I had one of my ancestors, her husband died on the way to Winter Quarters. She was left with 11 children on her own. She lived in, just some of the experiences I knew that she went through, and then to see it, it was incredible.
Oh, man. Yeah, and when we try to use what we call sociological imagination, where you try to enter someone else's experience, and you say, what was it like to have 11 kids? And in that era, there weren't the kind of social supports that we have now. You'd have to find a way to make a living and feed those kids. And boy, the law of consecration get to be really important to you, hoping that your neighbors would look after you and help you and take an interest.
She made it, all the children made it. Lived
Wow.
to make that track.
You know that story of the woman who, it's in the Pioneer kinds of things and in a movie where this mother, she didn't want to come, and they told her that she thought she would die, her health wasn't good enough, and she got a blessing, and it told her that she would make it all the way, and in the middle of the plains, she decides she's done. I'm not going anymore. I'm done. Leave me here. I can't go another step. And one of her daughters came back and tried to convince her to come, and they started walking, and they found a pie in the middle of the desert, right there, right in the middle of that story.
Wow.
And some of the people in our ward down in our stake down in
We were doing the Pioneer
Springville,
track, yeah.
they came and said, well, do you know we're related to those people, but do you know the blessing that she got that told her she'd make it was done by a Goddard?
Is that right? Maybe George Goddard?
Maybe. I'm not sure which one, but it was.
Tried to find it, but
Wow.
Anyway.
he promised her that her and her whole company would make it, her whole
Wow.
family.
Which is a pretty
And they did.
big promise for
Yeah.
as risk,
At that
as
time.
much at risk as they were.
They all did.
Um,
Anyway, this was beautiful. This was a sweet.
well, I know our lives have been blessed by writing one-page stories, haven't we, Nancy? And it's not like that's the only thing, but it's like one of those things that most people don't think to do. We think that to enter family history, you have to write a book and get it published, and our testimony is the most effective thing we can do is start capturing stories. I think
Is this all of them, or is this, or the volume? This is.
Yeah. That's the whole thing. About 70 one-page stories, and we keep thinking of more to write, and we're also thinking that it might be worthwhile to start to inventory the things we receive from ancestors. Like Nancy has a trunk from her great-great-grandfather, or whose trunk was it? Grandmother. And that trunk is likely to just get tossed, and somebody appreciates the story that goes with it. Well, at least when we die, someone's likely to say, oh, that's a piece of junk that Grandpa probably picked up at a yard sale. But if you know that it was tied to her great-grandmother, then you may value it. And so making sure that we've created kind of an inventory of some of the things, like I like to assume that everyone will value the kiwi that we inherited, but that's a lot more likely if we tell a story of coming home with Ben in 1895 and being an endangered animal by 1905, 1 decade later. And so it's rare as hen's teeth, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
And likewise, anything we have, we're trying to do that with Nancy's family also, with the Thackers. She's just had a sisters retreat with 3 sisters and 2 sisters and sister-in-law, and talked about how to take all the journals their mom created and all the scrapbooks. If Nellie Clopel in the Ashley ward got a toothache and went to the dentist, it was in the newspaper and her mom saved it. And so the question is, how do we best honor? There needs to be some way of saying that her mom was unique and really keeping track of people and being mindful and loving them and serving them. I'm not sure we need to keep the clipping about Nellie's toothache. As much as we love Nellie Clopel, we may not need to keep the newspaper clipping. So those decisions, we're feeling the pressure of being really mindful and not being careless as things move to the next generation. We've also thought that if God allows us to live long enough to finish the work, well, we've got another 100 years. So we're not sure if he does that or not, but we hope.
I think it'd probably take 100 years for them to sort through all the garbage we have in our house.